The cops told me I was allowed to clear my property, but the HOA decided that wasn't the end. Before the snow even stopped falling, they made a move that put my money and equipment at risk. It started before sunrise, the kind of gray-blue morning where the world felt muted and close. Snow had been falling all night, heavy and wet, and my driveway was already buried past the ankles. I pulled on boots, flipped on the porch light, and walked out to the trailer parked beside my garage. The snowblower sat there under a tarp, dusted white like everything else. I peeled the tarp back, metal scraping softly against frozen straps, and climbed onto the trailer to unhook the tie-downs. The engine coughed once, then roared to life, the sound sharp in the cold air. Snow blasted sideways as I started clearing a path from the garage to the street. Slow, steady passes, nothing reckless. Halfway down the driveway, I noticed movement across the street. A neighbor stood at their window, phone held up, lens aimed straight at me. I watched them step outside, still filming, boots crunching on the snow, then disappear back inside. A few minutes later, a cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac, tires hissing. The officer stepped out, jacket zipped to his chin, breath fogging as he watched me shut the snowblower down. We spoke calmly. He asked where I lived, I pointed. He asked what time it was, glanced at his watch and nodded. He told me plainly, clearing your own driveway during a snow event is allowed. No citation, no warning. He waited while I restarted the machine, then drove off. I thought that was the end of it. An hour later, as daylight finally broke through the clouds, I finished the last pass and rolled the snowblower back onto the trailer. I locked it, threw the tarp back over, and went inside. When I came out again with a shovel to widen the sidewalk edge, the trailer was still there, exactly where I left it. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed, an HOA notification, then another. I stepped back outside, snow crunching underfoot, and opened the app. A violation notice flashed on the screen. Common area disturbance, unauthorized equipment use. Attached was a grainy photo of my trailer, time-stamped early morning. A fine was listed. Under it, a line that made my stomach tighten. Further enforcement pending. I walked to the curb and looked around. The street was quiet now. Plows had passed. Neighbors were digging out, loading shovels into trunks, kids dragging sleds. Nothing felt tense until I noticed fresh tire tracks near where my trailer was parked, deeper and wider than before. I moved closer. The trailer hitch lock was still intact. The straps were still tight, but the angle was off. Someone had repositioned it.
That afternoon, a flatbed tow truck rolled in without sirens or noise, just the low rumble of diesel. I watched from the porch as the driver hopped out, clipboard under his arm. He walked straight to the trailer, circled it once, then began lowering the ramp. Metal clanged against metal as the chains came out. I stepped down the walkway, boots slipping slightly on the packed snow. "Hey," I called out, "that's my property." The driver didn't argue. He pointed to the paperwork clipped to his board. HOA authorization. He kept working, hooking, ratcheting, tightening. The snowblower trailer creaked as it was winched up, inch by inch, tires leaving the ground. By the time I reached the curb, the trailer was already secured. The driver handed me a receipt through the air, paper stiff from the cold. I watched my equipment disappear as the truck pulled away, taillights glowing red against the snow. That evening, another notice hit my inbox, final enforcement action. Attached was an invoice from the tow company listing removal and storage fees, due immediately. For the HOA, this was the moment they believed they'd won. They had a tow receipt, they had timestamps, they had leverage. I stood in the driveway staring at the empty space where the trailer had been that morning. The porch light reflected off untouched snow, smooth and quiet, hiding the tracks that told a different story. I didn't call anyone, I didn't argue, I didn't respond emotionally. Instead, I opened my phone camera and took a slow, steady video of the curb, the street, the snow depth, and the exact position where the trailer had been parked. I captured the angle, the distance to the sidewalk, the absence of any signage. Then I saved the HOA notice, the tow receipt, and the time-stamped photo they'd attached. If the HOA was confident this would stick, I needed to know one thing before making my next move. Did they actually have the authority they claimed? And did the timeline really match what they said happened? By the next morning, the bill arrived, and it looked official enough to end everything. If I paid it, the HOA would move on. If I didn't, things would escalate fast. The invoice hit my inbox just after 9 a.m., neatly formatted, logo at the top, balance due in bold, towing fee, daily storage, administrative charge. At the bottom, a polite but firm line. Non-payment may result in further action. It was the kind of document designed to make people comply without thinking. I opened the HOA portal and saw the same amount mirrored there, now labeled as an assessment. That word mattered. Assessments didn't just disappear. They rolled into late fees, then liens, then problems that followed you for years. I stepped outside again, phone in hand, and walked the perimeter of the street. Snow was melting unevenly now, exposing patches of asphalt and frozen slush. I filmed slowly, panning from my driveway to the curb, then across to the common sidewalk. A city plow passed, spraying mist, and I caught that on camera too. Proof that this was still active winter maintenance, not some quiet hour violation like the HOA claimed. Across the street, the same neighbor from the morning before came out with a shovel. They avoided eye contact. I didn't acknowledge them either. I wasn't here to confront anyone. Instead, I crouched down near the curb and photographed the ground. The tire marks from the tow truck were still there, distinct, heavy tread cutting through the snow layer that had fallen later in the morning. That detail mattered. It showed timing. It showed sequence. Back inside, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Printed invoice, HOA notice, screenshots, my own photos. I replayed the moment in my head when the officer had stood there, hands in his pockets, saying I was allowed to clear my driveway. That interaction hadn't been loud or dramatic, but it was real and it mattered. What bothered me most wasn't the money. It was how confidently the HOA had moved after the police left, as if they'd been waiting, as if towing had always been the plan. I logged into the tow company's website and found their public policy page. It explained their process: no tow without written authorization, time-stamped, tied to a specific violation. I saved the page as a PDF. Then I looked at the receipt again. It listed a pickup time that didn't match my memory. So I did something simple. I pulled up my phone's activity log. At the exact minute the receipt claimed the trailer was towed, my phone showed me standing in the driveway recording video. Video that clearly showed the trailer still on the ground, snow falling, no flatbed, no chains. That was physical evidence, visual, time-stamped, passive. I didn't send it yet. Instead, I drove to the tow yard listed on the invoice. The place sat behind a chain-link fence crusted with ice. Rows of vehicles lined up like they'd been abandoned. My trailer stood out immediately, bright metal against gray snow. I walked the fence line and filmed it from multiple angles, zooming in on the storage tag zip-tied to the frame. The tag had a handwritten time on it, different from the invoice. I asked the clerk if I could see the authorization paperwork. They shook their head, not without the HOA's request. That was fine. I wasn't there to argue. I filmed the front office sign, the posted business hours, and the date board behind the counter. When I got back home, another HOA notification came through. This one, colder, shorter. It warned that failure to resolve the assessment could trigger additional remedies. This was the HOA's second win moment. On paper, they had control. They had my equipment. They had a bill with my name on it. Most people would have paid just to make it stop. That's why I didn't rush. Instead, I sent one calm message through the HOA portal. No accusations, no emotion, just a request. 1. A copy of the written towing authorization issued to the vendor. 2. The exact time window cited for the violation. 3. The camera timestamps used to justify enforcement. I attached nothing. I argued nothing. Then I waited. While waiting, I organized my footage, street, snow, curb, tow yard, timestamps, into a single folder. Everything labeled, everything clean. If someone ever watched this unfold, they wouldn't need to believe me. They could see it. Before closing my laptop, I paused and looked straight into the camera I'd been using all morning. If you're watching this and you've ever felt pressured by paperwork that looked final but didn't feel right, take a second and subscribe. Stories like this matter, not because of drama, but because proof still beats power when you let the process expose itself. By the end of the day, the HOA finally replied. They sent one document, and the moment I opened it, I knew something didn't line up. So what exactly did their authorization say, and what did it leave out?
The document the HOA sent looked airtight until I matched it against the street. That's when the timeline stopped agreeing with itself. The authorization was a single-page PDF, clean, official. It listed my address, the violation category, and a narrow enforcement window that made everything seem deliberate. According to the HOA, the trailer had been towed during a specific 30-minute span for common area obstruction. On paper, it worked. In reality, it didn't. I opened my video from that morning and scrubbed to the exact minute their window started. The snowblower trailer was still parked, untouched, with fresh snow collecting on the tarp. No tow truck, no chains, just silence and snowfall. I paused the frame and zoomed in on the porch clock reflected in my window, clear enough to read. Then I did something else. I pulled on my jacket and walked back outside with my phone. The snow had melted more now, revealing a darker patch of pavement where the trailer had sat all morning. I filmed it slowly, then followed the tow truck tire tracks again, this time tracing them backward with the camera, step by step. The tracks crossed a section of snow that had fallen later, something you could only see if you looked closely at the layers. That mattered. Snow doesn't lie about order. I went to the streetlight pole near my driveway and filmed it, tilting the camera up until the HOA camera came into view. It was positioned to watch the curb and sidewalk. If the HOA claimed obstruction, that camera would show exactly when the trailer moved. I didn't request footage yet. Instead, I laid everything out side by side on my screen. HOA authorization window, tow receipt pickup time, storage yard tag time, my driveway video timestamps, snowfall radar screenshots from that morning. The times drifted, not wildly, just enough to create gaps you couldn't explain away without rewriting events. That evening, I went back to the tow yard. The fence was still there, the same rows of vehicles. I filmed my trailer again and focused on the winch marks, fresh metal scratches that told a story of how it had been pulled. I angled the camera low to capture the packed snow beneath the tires. No melt, no refreeze. That meant it had been moved earlier than claimed, before temperatures rose. Inside the office, I stood near the counter and filmed the posted compliance notice explaining that all tows required logged authorization with timestamps. The clerk noticed but didn't stop me. I wasn't filming people, just signs, clocks, and policies. Back home, another HOA message arrived. They acknowledged my request for camera timestamps and said they were reviewing availability. No denial, no confirmation, just delay. That delay told me more than any document. I didn't push. I waited. The next morning, I took a slow walk down the block as neighbors cleared the last of the slush. Someone dragged a trash bin across the street, wheels rattling. A delivery van idled briefly near the curb. All of it went on camera, not because it was dramatic, but because it showed normal use of the space the HOA claimed my trailer had disrupted. Then finally, the HOA sent a second file. Still images, pulled from the camera. 3 frames, each timestamped. At first glance, they looked convincing. The trailer appeared near the curb, snow on the ground, quiet street. But the timestamps were off by minutes. Minutes that overlapped with my own footage showing the trailer still secured, still unmoved, still covered. I enlarged the images and noticed something small. a shadow angle on the snowbank. In my video, the sun hadn't risen high enough to cast that shadow yet. In theirs, it had. Same morning, different times. That was the moment the wind tipped. For the HOA, the evidence was supposed to end the conversation. For me, it opened one. I compiled a single video, no narration, no captions, just synchronized clips. My driveway, the curb, the tow yard CAG, and their camera frames all aligned to the same clock reference. Before sending anything, I paused. If you're watching this and thinking I'd never go this far, understand this: I wasn't fighting, I was letting reality line itself up. If stories like this help you see how to protect yourself without confrontation, subscribe. These situations happen more often than people think. I sent one final message through the HOA portal: calm, short, professional. I asked a single question. Can you explain how your enforcement window overlaps with these timestamps? No accusations, no demands, just time versus time. They didn't respond that day or the next, but early on the third morning, a new notification appeared. Different tone, different sender. Not enforcement, not billing. It was from the HOA's management company, and it said they needed to reevaluate the tow in light of new information. That's when I knew the paper win was cracking. So what happens when an HOA realizes its own evidence can't hold together, and who do they try to fix it with first?
When the HOA stopped threatening me, I knew something had changed. Silence in cases like this usually means someone is checking the math. The message from the management company was brief and unusually careful. No accusations, no deadlines, just a note saying they were reviewing vendor compliance and would follow up once the review was complete. It was the first time anyone associated with the HOA had acknowledged that the tow itself, not my snowblower, might be the issue. That same morning, I noticed movement outside. A white sedan rolled slowly down the street and parked near the curb camera. A man stepped out, tablet in hand, and stood there longer than anyone ever had before. He didn't knock on doors, he didn't take pictures of houses, he just looked up, directly at the camera, then down at the curb, then back at the camera again. I watched from my window as he paced the length of the sidewalk, stopping where my trailer had been parked. He crouched briefly, brushed slush away with his glove, and stood up again. When he left, he didn't look back. That afternoon, I drove past the tow yard once more. My trailer was still there, but something was different. The handwritten tag had been replaced with a printed one. New time, new date, clean edges. I filmed it again, slowly, making sure the yard's digital clock was in frame. Back home, I checked the HOA portal. The assessment still showed as unpaid, but the due date had been quietly extended. No announcement, no explanation, just a shift. That's how organizations correct mistakes before admitting them. I didn't push, I didn't send another message. Instead, I went back to the street. I filmed the curb camera from multiple angles, then walked the sidewalk as the sun dropped, catching the way shadows stretched across the snowbanks. I recorded passing cars, a jogger, a neighbor pulling a suitcase over the same stretch of concrete the HOA claimed had been obstructed. All normal, all unremarkable, all visible. That night, a new email arrived, this one from the tow company directly. They said they were reviewing documentation related to my tow and asked if I had any additional records to share. That told me everything. Vendors don't ask questions unless they're trying to protect themselves. I replied with a single attachment, the synchronized timeline video. No commentary, no highlight circles, just time moving forward, uninterrupted. The next day, the HOA board meeting agenda was posted online. Item 4, Vendor Review. That was the first public sign that the situation had escaped the enforcement box and entered the liability one. I attended the meeting virtually, camera off, microphone muted. I watched board members shuffle papers, adjust their screens, and glance at each other when the agenda reached item 4. The property manager spoke carefully, choosing words like discrepancy and process alignment. No one mentioned my name. During the discussion, One board member said something that stuck with me. They asked whether the tow company had acted independently or if the authorization process had been misapplied. Those weren't questions asked by people who were confident anymore. After the meeting, the HOA portal updated again. The assessment was still there, but the late fee line had been removed. Another quiet shift. I walked outside as dusk settled and stood where the trailer had been taken. The snow was almost gone now, leaving damp pavement and faint tire marks fading into nothing. It was strange how fast physical evidence disappeared and how permanent digital evidence stayed. If you're watching this and thinking the turning point was some dramatic confrontation, it wasn't. It was patience. It was letting systems check themselves. If stories like this help you understand how documentation works in real life, not just in theory, hit subscribe. These lessons don't show up until someone lets the process play out. 2 days later, I got the call, not from the HOA, from the tow company. The representative sounded rehearsed but nervous. They said they'd identified an internal authorization issue and were preparing to release my trailer pending billing clarification. They asked when I'd be available to retrieve it. I asked one question before answering. Would there be any balance due at pickup? There was a pause. Then they said no. I didn't celebrate. I didn't argue. I just asked them to email confirmation. When it arrived, I saved it, printed it, and placed it with everything else. That evening, a final HOA message came through. They said enforcement was temporarily suspended while the matter was finalized. Temporarily. Which meant they were still deciding how to land. I stood in the driveway again, looking at the empty space where the trailer would soon return. The threat had shifted from pressure on me to pressure inside their own system. The only question left was how far they'd go to close the loop. Would they quietly refund everything, or would they try to salvage authority by blaming the vendor entirely?
They said I could pick it up, but the way they said it mattered, because returns are where stories get rewritten. The email from the tow company was short and careful. Pickup approved, no balance due. Bring ID. Office hours listed twice like they wanted to avoid misunderstandings. I printed it anyway and slipped it into a folder already thick with paper. At the yard, the gate buzzed open and the same clerk nodded without enthusiasm. I filmed my steps across the gravel, the office clock on the wall, the date board behind the counter. Outside, my trailer sat where it had been all week, but now the chains were gone. The tarp had shifted slightly, exposing the corner of the snowblower chute. I walked around it slowly, camera rolling, documenting condition, tires, frame, hitch, straps. Nothing damaged, nothing missing. The clerk handed me a release form and pointed to the exit. No explanation, no apology, just a pen. Before signing, I asked for a copy of the tow authorization they had on file. The clerk hesitated, then said they'd email it later. I signed anyway. I wasn't there to debate. I was there to finish the sequence. As I pulled out, the yard's camera caught my departure. I made sure of it, pausing just long enough for the lens to settle. Back home, I parked the trailer in the same spot it had been taken from and filmed that too. Same curb, same angle, no obstruction. The street didn't even notice. That afternoon, the HOA portal changed again. The assessment dropped to 0. No announcement, no message, just a line item quietly removed as if it had never existed. The violation status switched to resolved. Resolved how exactly wasn't specified. I waited. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from the HOA's management company, printed, signed. It stated that the enforcement action had been withdrawn due to vendor non-compliance and that all associated charges were reversed. It also included a line about future coordination improvements. Still no apology, still no admission. But there was something new.
A second attachment, an updated vendor policy. The tow company's name was no longer listed. I walked outside again and filmed the street, this time with spring light breaking through the clouds. Neighbors passed, oblivious. Life moved on the way it always does when a problem is contained. If you're watching this and wondering why I kept filming after the trailer came back, here's why. Outcomes change, records don't. If stories like this help you understand why documentation matters even after you win, subscribe. The quiet parts are where the real lessons live. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was the HOA president. Their tone was polite, almost casual. They said they wanted to close the loop and ensure there were no hard feelings. They mentioned the vendor issue again, emphasizing that the board had acted in good faith. I listened. When they finished, I asked one question, whether the HOA would issue a written confirmation that the tow was unauthorized. There was a pause, then a careful answer. They said the letter already covered that. It didn't. I didn't argue. I thanked them for their time and ended the call. An hour later, a revised letter arrived. This one stated plainly that the tow had been executed without proper written authorization during the cited window. It confirmed reimbursement and closed the matter. That was the ending they didn't want but needed. I saved it, printed it, filed it. Because the last move in situations like this isn't celebration, it's preservation. The HOA had tried to hold authority with paper. In the end, paper held them. The only thing left was the final step, the one that doesn't show up on invoices or portals. What happens after an HOA corrects a mistake but never truly acknowledges it? And how do you protect yourself the next time they test the line?
The trailer was back, the bill was gone, but the story wasn't over yet. Because what happens after a quiet reversal tells you who really learned the lesson. Spring arrived without ceremony. The last snowbanks collapsed into dark slush and then vanished, leaving clean pavement and a street that looked like nothing had ever happened. From the outside, it was over. Inside the HOA system, though, things were still settling. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was taking the trash out when a contractor truck slowed near the curb. Not the tow company, this one carried a camera mast on the roof. The driver parked, stepped out, and extended the mast toward the same curb line where my trailer had once sat. He took wide-angle shots, then close-ups of signage that didn't exist. I filmed from my driveway, quietly, steadily. Later that evening, the HOA posted a community update. It announced revised enforcement procedures for curbside obstructions during weather events. New language, new definitions. No mention of snowblowers, no mention of towing, but the subtext was obvious. They were closing the gap that had embarrassed them. A week later, the curb camera was repositioned, higher, wider field of view. I recorded the installation from across the street as the technician adjusted angles and checked the feed on a tablet. The camera now watched more, but it also documented more. That cut both ways. I didn't complain, I didn't object. I documented.
The next HOA meeting agenda went up. Item 7, Vendor Termination Confirmation. The tow company's name appeared once, then never again. A replacement vendor was listed, with stricter authorization requirements and mandatory time-stamped approvals visible to management. Process had replaced improvisation. Neighbors began to talk, not loudly, not directly, just small comments while walking dogs or loading groceries. Someone mentioned they'd heard towing rules changed. Someone else said the board was being more careful lately. Careful was the word. If you're watching this and thinking the win is just about money or equipment, it isn't. It's about shifting behavior without confrontation. If these stories help you see how quiet documentation changes outcomes, subscribe. This is how real disputes end, without fireworks. A month later, I received one final envelope from the HOA. Inside was a policy acknowledgement form. They wanted owners to sign that they'd reviewed the updated enforcement procedures. I read it carefully. It included clear weather exemptions, clear authorization chains,
clear appeal timelines. I signed it, not because I trusted them, but because I wanted the record to show I participated in the corrected process. That same week, a neighbor down the block parked a utility trailer overnight. It sat there until morning. No tow, no notice, just a reminder slip taped to the door asking for relocation within 24 hours. That had never happened before. The system had learned. On a quiet Saturday, I rolled the snowblower trailer out again, this time for maintenance. I filmed the setup out of habit: straps, hitch, curb distance. The street was calm, no phones raised, no trucks idling. The camera watched, but it didn't act. That was the real ending. Not an apology, not a confession, but restraint. I archived everything: videos, letters, timestamps, into a single folder labeled by date. Not because I expected trouble, but because records age better than memories. If the line was ever tested again, the history would already be written. Looking back, the most dangerous moment wasn't the tow, it was the invoice that looked final. The moment designed to make compliance feel cheaper than clarity. That's where most stories end. This one didn't, because I let time, visuals, and process speak in order. If you're dealing with an HOA, remember this: you don't need to out-argue them. You need to outlast the mistake with proof intact. Film the ordinary, save the timestamps, let their own systems tell the story. And when the snow melts, when everything looks normal again, check what changed. That's where the outcome lives. If you want more real, monetization-safe HOA stories like this, grounded, lawful, and based on how these systems actually move, subscribe. The next one might sound familiar, because somewhere, right now, another invoice just landed, and someone is deciding whether to pay it or document it.